Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. I want to say hello to all our homeboys, homegirls, home trends, and our guest today. His name is Rabbi Evan Moffic, joining Adam and me. Rabbi Moffic is a good friend of ours. Known him for almost a year now. I saw Rabbi Moffic speak in person at a conference in Orlando last year. And Rabbi Moffic, he's acclaimed as one of the most well-known, most famous rabbis in the country. Why is that? Well, he's a #1 best-selling author, I think New York Times best-selling author of the books What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Jewishness of Jesus, a New Way of Seeing the Most Influential Rabbi in History, and also the book What Every Christian Needs to Know About Passover, what it means and why it matters. Rabbi Moffic is a spiritual leader of congregation Solel in suburban Chicago. So Rabbi Moffic, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Naresh, it's an honor. I love the show, as you know. I mean, we're friends, so I've been listening to it and have just really learned a lot from it and been inspired by it. And I'm so glad to be talking with you.
Well, we really appreciate your coming on the show, and I find your expertise and the topics that you're going to discuss to be extremely relevant because we're going to talk about, you're a spiritual leader, we're going to talk about the spiritual side of working from home. And I want to start that discussion, Rabbi Moffic, by discussing loneliness and how we can deal with loneliness at home during the pandemic, even after the pandemic ends, just working from home in general. What are your best tips?
Well, I think it's a big issue. And sometimes, given what we're reading in the media, we might not think it's an issue because we're hearing so many stories about, parents working from home, having to juggle with their kids at home, and there being so much chaos and so much, house feeling crowded. But the truth is, there are a lot of people who work from home by themselves right now, and they find some camaraderie and friendship in just simple community in the office. And when you don't have that, we're missing out on something in life. So I think the best practices are to set meetings, to keep a consistent schedule. The people that I've talked to in my congregation who have been able to navigate this best, they really have a consistent schedule. They have a plan for each day, some sort of ritual. When they talk with some friends at 3 as a midday break, or they have a standing meeting at 11. So having consistent ways of connecting is important because you don't have that drop-in ability anymore. You don't have that ability to just drop in somebody's cubicle or somebody's office. You have to be more intentional in setting those times.
Now, can you talk about how your job has changed? I mean, you're leading the congregation. Obviously you would have office hours, you would have people coming into the temple to worship. How has leading the community like that changed?
It has changed so much. It's almost hard to fathom. It really is. I mean, first of all, I'm actually working much harder. I mean, I was working hard before, don't get me wrong. There are so many things that need to be attended to, and there's more need. I'm talking more with people in my congregation who are struggling. Some are struggling financially. They've lost their job or been furloughed and need some kind of guidance and counseling. People who have relatives who are sick and they can't go visit them in the hospital. And they talk to me. Some people say, Rabbi, can you talk to the nursing home and help them? Let me in. And I have to say, I really can't do that. So there's a lot more counseling. And paradoxically, there are actually a lot more people involved now. Like if I were to teach a class at the synagogue on like a Thursday afternoon, I would maybe get 10 or 15 people. Now I'm getting 40 or 50 people. Maybe it's because they have nothing else to do. I don't know. Or maybe they just feel like they need some spiritual nourishment. So it's actually been a lot more demand and a lot more time to be invested. And it's also a struggle. I find myself that I have to prepare a lot more when I teach a class in person. There's a little looseness. I can engage with people, have more kind of unstructured discussion. Now everything has to be very structured. So it's been a big uptick in work, actually.
That's a great answer. I've got several questions for you, so just allow me to ask probably two questions separately instead of together. So first thing is regarding the virus. You said you've been pretty busy. Now, have you actually been going to the hospital? I know it's very common for priests to go to the hospital if somebody in the hospital being treated asks for one. Have you been asked to either visit the hospital, or priests, even priests or rabbis, or no matter what religion you are those leaders, spiritual leaders, religious leaders, even allowed in the hospital to pray for these individuals who might be suffering from the virus? And the second thing is I know one major aspect of your job is conducting funerals. And my guess is you've probably not been doing in-person funerals, maybe Zoom funerals. So how has that been? And have you seen this virus? Is it as rampant as the media makes it out to be?
Well, yeah, the hospitals and nursing homes around here have not let anybody in. Although I just heard today that the hospital was allowing, we had a woman in the congregation who has a brain tumor, and they're allowing her sisters to visit one at a time for 20 minutes each visit. And that's new. Today's the first day I've heard of it. But prior to this, people have not been allowed to visit anywhere. And in fact, the assisted living homes are the strictest. They barely allow the residents out of their rooms. I mean, the residents, I was talking to one yesterday, she's 82 years old, and her husband is in a higher care unit. So she can't even leave her apartment to go see him. They deliver all the meals to the residents in their rooms. And the residents, the only time they're really allowed to leave is they're allowed to go downstairs to the library to pick up a book, but they can't sit in the library and stay. They have to go back up to their room. So these assisted living homes are very strict, and the hospital's the same. So I really have not been able to go and visit people. I have done kind of FaceTime calls, and I've called people on the phone just to check in, but no visits. And that's really hard. I mean, it's hard for me, but it's really hard for the families, like the children and spouses who can't see each other. Now, funerals are very hard too. Most of the funerals that I've done, and I've done several people who died from COVID-19. Now, they were all in their 80s and 90s, so they weren't really tragic deaths in that regard. But most of them have been like 10 people or less at the graveside. So you have just the immediate family assembles, and then they'll have a Zoom. They'll broadcast it to friends and family that are tuning in. I have had one totally Zoom funeral. In fact, the deceased was in Houston, but the daughter who lives here couldn't fly there. And so we did a totally Zoom funeral service. And to be honest with you, it was actually quite moving. The daughter was able to give a beautiful eulogy with essentially like a PowerPoint that we all could watch. And it was actually, I said to her after, I said, this is really actually very moving and powerful. So it's hard and it's different, but I still think it's bringing comfort to people.
You mentioned that you used to have 15 people at a weekday thing, and now there's 50. What other ways have you seen your congregation kind of keeping their faith stoked as they are sequestered in their house?
I think it's a challenge. I think a lot of times they're connecting with other people in the synagogue, just like with each other. Like even they'll do a Zoom kind of happy hour or a Zoom hangout with friends or 3 or 4 and just stay connected with each other that way. I think people are wrestling with, more kind of spiritual existential questions as well. Kind of, how could this happen? These questions come up all the time when people face tragedies, but we're all kind of struggling with, why is our life like this? What does this mean for our country, our community? A lot of times, to be honest with you too, in New York, there's, New York's obviously an epicenter. And for the first few weeks, there was a lot of ultra-Orthodox communities where the virus was spreading very quickly. And so some of my congregants were kind of saying to me, why are these Jewish communities being so stupid? Why aren't they taking this seriously? And they were asking me, I said, I can't tell you what's going on in their minds. But I think that's died down now because I think everyone realizes how serious it is. But that was a big issue too. I think people are struggling with their faith, but it's really become more important. I think people do see the synagogue, and I'm sure the church and everything is kind of a way of staying connected with something bigger than themselves right now.
I've been reading a lot about how managers in businesses are having to learn to give people leeway or don't give people leeway, or how often to check in. Are you reaching out to people individually? Or are you just letting people come to you? How has your management of the congregation changed?
It's a good question. I try to reach out to people that I know are struggling. So I'll just give them a call and say hello and just, even chat for 5 minutes, just to check in. I wish I could do more of it. It's hard to I don't want to impose on people, but at the same time, I know people are struggling. It has been hard to really, as a leader, as a rabbi, I'm we have a big staff and I'm the head of staff in a way, but everyone, we all have our own areas. And I think it's a struggle for everybody to stay on the same page and to stay focused and to not give up. I mean, in some ways, I have to be a morale booster for everybody. That's sometimes trying. I have to say, yes, we're going to get through this. Yes, what we do is important. Yes, we have to figure out, we have to stay positive, so a lot of it's just morale boosting. But I tell you, what really worries me is, Easter happened just in the midst of this, where churches had to totally rethink what they did. We have the Jewish high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in September, where we usually get over 1,000 people. And now we're thinking, what are we going to do? And this is like a lot of people join the synagogue just to come for the high holidays. So we're asking ourselves, what if people say, oh, there's not going to be any high holidays this year, so I don't want to pay my dues, and how are we going to deal with that on a budgetary level? So we've got all these kind of looming issues that, I have to keep people on track and focused on.
Well, Rabbi Evan, let's talk really quickly about kind of the industry, because the industry that you work in, because what you've basically said is that you've had to adapt to this new abnormal. We don't really we think about the restaurant workers, we think about the gyms, but we don't think about the rabbis and the priests and the temples and the synagogues and the mosques, and how they have to adapt also. And for you to be saying that you did this Zoom funeral and somebody had a PowerPoint, and you did another funeral on Zoom, and you're giving these sessions and congregations on Skype and Zoom and phone, that's a lot of adaptation that's been going on within the religious sphere. So tell us a little bit about why it's important for people in your industry to continue to adapt, what you think the future is going to look like for your industry, and then also just kind of the business model. Are you charging for each kind of client that comes your way, needs help, or doing a funeral? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the business model because I've been thinking a lot about that lately. We were actually going to change the business model of our synagogue this year, but we decided not to because of it. See, essentially the way we run is we have membership. People join the synagogue almost like they join a gym. Hopefully this is a little more higher level than a gym, although gyms are important. But
and hopefully they come to congregation more often than they go to the gym.
Yeah. That I wish was true. But so people pay an annual fee and they join, and then basically with all of that, they have access to me for events and things like that. They can come to classes, they can come to services, and then essentially and they're also, they can write it off on their taxes. It's a sort of a philanthropic. We try to sort of not think about it as fee for service, that you may not come a lot, but you should still pay the full dues because you're supporting the community. And we don't turn people away. If somebody says, you know what, I lost my job, I can only pay, $500 this year or something, we say, absolutely, we'll make it work. But that's the general business model. And fortunately, we have people who can kind of backstop us. They're big donors, they're very charitable, and they'll support the institution at a much greater degree. We were going to switch essentially to a voluntary dues model. We were going to say to everybody, basically, here's what it costs to run our institution. Pay what you can. We did a lot of research and kind of modeling, and it came out that it would actually be better. We decided to put that on hold because we just don't know. Every model it's so unpredictable given what's happened. So I'm concerned that, fewer people will sign up. I think we'll be fine, but it's definitely a concern as to, where people will put their limited resources. So we don't charge for any of the classes or anything like that, which is good. And people do invite friends to it. what I have noticed is for people that are lucky enough to have their jobs, to be continuing to work well and make money through this crisis, they actually want to help others. So we've had very good luck saying we have some people in need who've lost their job. We have a special fund to help such people. And I can go to some of our wealthier members and say, can you give $1,000 to this fund? Can you give $5,000 to this fund? And they do in a second. It's like not even an issue. So that's been really, really good to see that aspect of the community to be really strong with each other. And I've had to ask a few people to help us pay for some new technology, some better cameras and so forth. And people have stepped up in that regard. So that's been really lucky. And I anticipate, in terms of the changes, I think it's going to be more of a hybrid model in the future. So people are already saying, well, we have all these people coming to our classes. Why don't we continue our Zoom classes once we can go back in the building? So I think essentially we are going to be a mixture in the future of in-person and virtual learning. Now, services will always be in person. We'll have, hopefully we'll be able to gather again in 50 or more people and worship together, but there'll be a lot more happening online.
Now, you said you basically have the gym membership model. So if I paid the membership, I basically have access to you and your team, like, indefinitely?
Yeah, within reason. I mean, it's not like somebody says, oh, I'm getting married in Las Vegas, Rabbi, I need you to come out, fly and do it. It's sort of within reason. But that's sort of the general idea with pastoral care too. I'll visit people in the hospital and so forth. So it's kind of it's an interesting model. Theoretically, that's how it should work. But it's also true that if somebody came to me that wasn't a member and needed some help and I could do it, I would do it, as long as it was legitimate. There are people who come and sort of, they try to take advantage of rabbis and priests, and I watch out for those people. But in general, that's sort of the model, yes.
Well, I'm just intrigued by that because I'm Hindu, and I'm pretty, I go to the temple every Sunday, or at least I was before the lockdown, and our priests, let's just say they're very, very sharp business people. Let's put it that way.
That's interesting.
So most of them, the sharp ones, are independent. So they start out usually at a temple, and then they realize, hey, well, I should go out on my own and just do this just on my own. And they're so busy, and they charge an arm and a leg because you're only going to get the good ones. Right? You can pay very little for the bad, but we're talking about God and religion here. Like, why would we want a bad one? So they're ultra busy, and they charge an arm and a leg. And so to hear you say, oh yeah, you just pay this like membership and you get access to me. It's like, oh wow. Like, I don't think anyone in our community does something like that.
So interesting. So what exactly, I mean, I don't know too many Hindu leaders. What do they do? I mean, obviously some counseling, maybe weddings, things like that. But what else are they charging for?
Yeah, it's actually kind of the opposite of. So you're more, at least I could be wrong, but you're like a speaker. You give sermons. Yeah. You're very well educated. It's not that way in the Hindu space, where you are educated in at least the good ones go to their religion school. Like, they might have a degree from some school in India about that, but their English speaking skills are not very good. They're not speakers. They don't give sermons. They are really experts on the oldest language in the world, which is Sanskrit.
Or Sanskrit, right.
And so they actually come in and they just do all these rituals and prayers in Sanskrit that really, I think 100%, really nobody knows what they're doing or what they're saying. Yeah. But it's supposed to bless you, and people pay a lot of money for it.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that. So well, maybe we got a couple ideas there. But there is something about the kind of just being in community that I think, that worries me a little bit, because a lot of people do feel the tie when they're in the same room, in the same sanctuary as others. And so since we can't do that, I wonder if people are still feeling the benefit of being part of the synagogue. And that's been a constant challenge, is to convey that benefit to people. It's almost like a concert hall. You can listen to a concert on YouTube, but it's different when you're actually there. So feel like I'm worried people are feeling like they're missing out.
Yeah. So going back to the loneliness factor, and you were kind of alluding to it right there, whenever you're in regular life, we'll say, 5 months ago, people could obviously just come to the church, go to a meeting, or come and hang out in your office if they needed to. How are you making these Zoom meetings and the other meetings that you're having feel like something that, isn't some cold meeting that, it doesn't actually satisfy the need for human companionship that people have?
It's hard. And I think I am doing a better job now. At first, I was just treating it as sort of like a normal class. I could get there and it was kind of all business. Here's what's going on. I'm going to start teaching now. Now I'm much more like, almost like a check-in at the beginning. We kind of schmooze and, say, how are you doing? Are you getting outside at all? How's this person feeling? So I think I've tried to introduce a little bit more conversation and sociability into the classes. And then they're also kind of different spheres. Like we've had a couple of, there's this service that we do worship on Saturday evening called Havdalah. And it's much more relaxed than a Shabbat service. It's a lot of singing. And so we've kind of turned that experience into something more social. We have a healing service, which is very meditative, where the music is some soothing music. And so try to create different environments as much as we can through Zoom. So it's sort of just kind of adapting as things go on, and then kind of carving out those social experiences, which are so important. I think I kind of discounted it at the beginning, but now, especially as people are at home more, it's even more important.
Rabbi Evan, what are your tips for staying sane while working from home?
It's I've been thinking about that a lot, because here in Chicago, where I am, it's pretty strict. Like, there's really nothing open. And so I think most importantly is just to stay in contact with people, check in, don't kind of get balled up in yourself and in loneliness. And if you're living alone, which is really hard for some people, just make sure you're having contact with people in the outside world. I think also one thing that I've been thinking about lately, and I use this in counseling people who have experienced the death of a loved one. They're so sad and so caught up in the emotion. And one of the things I've said to them is, imagine the time when this will be over. How do you want to feel, when you're no longer grieving? So imagine that emotional feeling. And I think right now I've said that to people. This will end. The quarantine will end. You will be able to get back to normal life again. So imagine how you want to feel then, and kind of bring yourself into that state. And I think that helps, because it also gives us hope. It gives us a picture that this time will end. Now, at the beginning, I was like, oh, we're all going to be home. Let's use this to do a lot of self-learning and grow. And that's all important. I'm all for learning. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that this is not normal, and that let's not put too high expectations on ourselves right now either. Don't expect, I'm going to take this time to learn a new language, or, I'm going to, write the next great American novel. That might have felt like a positive, hopeful productivity feeling at the beginning, but now it's just, relax, do the best you can. Imagine what it's going to be like when it's over, because it will be over at some point.
Yeah, it's kind of like we were talking before we started recording about how I said this isn't homeschooling, this is crisis schooling.
Yes.
This also isn't working from home, it's crisis working from home. Because, there will eventually be a time where you're working from home, you feel lonely, you go out to a store, you go out to a park, you do something like that. But what do you think when this is over? Do you think that the country will see a resurgence of kind of spirituality and of people going to congregations as they kind of realize that maybe something was missing in their life, a sense of community, a sense of purpose, and kind of looking to a higher power? Do you think we'll see anything like that?
I do. I'm not sure. I think the country in general is becoming more secular, especially among middle class, upper middle class. I think that the country is generally becoming more secular. People are, the statistics prove this out. The fastest growing a denomination is spiritual but not religious, or nothing. So I do think some people will return. I think part of that might also be a recession. Like actually religious communities do better during economic downturns. So I think that's going to be part of it. I think the community part will be helpful. I think people do realize the value of community, and this is something we've talked about. If people spend more time at home and more time kind of in their local communities, that's good for churches and synagogues. And so I do think that could be a positive.
Evan, why do you think it's important that we all kind of, this sounds like a strange question, but why we're all in this together, why we should all continue to be nice to each other and get through not just the lockdown, but also the unemployment, the economy. Why is it important that we all work together and embrace our neighbors and being with each other and getting through these times?
Well, I think in the long run, it's better to be kind and better to be sort of devoted to your community because it makes for a happier life. We human beings are social animals. We're complex. There's parts of us that hate other people too, or that, want to, dominate and so forth. But I think many of us and most of us have a yearning to be connected to other people and to support others. There's an altruistic gene within us, and it's not just religion, it's sort of part of our makeup. So I think part of that is just because we're human beings and we support one another. And I also think there is something meaningful. There's a satisfaction that we get from service, from helping others. I get emails probably at least one a day from somebody in the community who says, I'm happy to go food shopping for somebody who can't get out of their house, or I'm making masks for the community to donate, any of the profits that we make. So I think that we're happier when we are serving others. So I think that's one thing. And I think the second thing is it's just better for our country in the long run. There is something about self-sacrifice. I've always, in Israel, everybody has to serve in the military for 2.5 or 3 years after high school. And Israel is actually the sense of happiness and community in Israel is much higher than it is in the United States. It's more like, the countries in Norway and Denmark, that have a high level of happiness. So I think that there is something really positive about being connected to the larger community and not just being shut off, in our own islands. That might feel good sometimes, but in the long run, we're happier when we're helping others.
What do you think is going to happen coming out of this? Personally, my feelings whenever I think about all the different religions is that the religions kind of know about each other and they're kind of like the passive friends who wave hello as they're walking by on the street but don't really interact. Have you seen more interaction between religions as this goes on, as people are doing it?
Yes, a little bit. I think in some ways we're all just kind of tending our own flock. But I do think that I was talking actually with a friend of mine who's a Protestant minister, and she was just on a Skype video with 5 other ministers from across the country. And she's pretty liberal. She's a UCC, United Church of Christ, which is a very liberal denomination. And several of the people on the call were sort of very conservative evangelicals. And she was telling me that there was a kind of unity in the group because they're all facing similar challenges. They're all asking the question, when can we get back together again in person? But how can we make sure that it's safe? How do we communicate this to our laity, to our people, to convey that it's safe? How do we reassure and bring comfort to people who are struggling? Like in some ways, because the spiritual challenges are so similar, there's actually a lot more to share and talk about right now.
Switching topics a little bit to business and entrepreneurship and people who are locked down at home or now forced to work from home over an extended, indefinite period of time. What are your recommendations on how people can find meaning and value in the work that they're currently doing, or just trying to think up of an idea or a business to potentially start?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this too. I think the first thing is just to figure out a way to add value, to add some meaning. So there's someone in my congregation who started making masks. There's someone in my congregation she's our art teacher in the religious school, and she does sort of freelance art teaching. And she started offering an everyday almost like a drop-in for kids to do an art class. I've seen this school, this online, I don't think it's not really a school, but one of my kids is taking a class on playing the video game Animal Crossing. And, it's cheap. It's like $10 a class, but whoever's teaching that class is making a lot of money, because there's a lot of kids signed up for it. So I think figuring out where you can add value and not worrying as much about the price. Like, I think right now it's in that phase of if you can get people's attention, just worry about getting eyeballs and getting people. Don't worry as much about what your margin is right now, because over time, this is a time of crisis for a lot of people. So I wouldn't want to come across right now as like, money hungry and pushing people. I would want to come across as, how can I deliver? I mean, we should always come across how can I deliver value, but really focus on that right now, because I think there's enormous potential. I think people are looking for ways to engage. People are more likely to take a chance on something that they see on Facebook if you're running a Facebook ad for something. So figuring out a way to add value and then honing in on what people's issues are, like what you guys are doing. I mean, when I heard that this podcast was starting, I was like, this is amazing. What a great service. People are working from home. They're looking for some guidance and inspiration. People love podcasts. Let me listen to this podcast. So I'm just constantly thinking of ways to try to deliver more value given the circumstances people are in.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode, Evan. You will be back for the next episode as well as we continue our conversation with the rabbi. Everybody go check out our website, www.workfromhomeshow.com. That's workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list. Get a free copy of Naresh's book, 50 Shades of Marketing. Also, if you have any questions for us or for Evan, send us an email. hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And until next time, keep on working from home.